Welcome to High Stakes, Episode 5. I'm your host, Neil Orfield, and I'm joined today by one of the top DFS players today and one of the best DFS players of all time. He plays DFS all year, and he's near the top of every sport leaderboard in the Roto-Grinders rankings. He's top 50 in NFL, MLB, NBA, PGA, and MMA. Great DFS player. But Brian Hooper is my guest. Did you play any Lee Hodges today?
Lee Hodges in PGA?
PGA, yeah.
No, I don't. Let me check. I don't know. But
I did not. I just checked. I did not. He started off with 5 birdies to start off the day, so had to ask.
Oh, really? Okay. That must be in the second half because I don't remember that. I was watching the
He just started. Yeah, he just started. Anyway, I thought I'd start there, but yeah. I mean, I got to zero, at least on DraftKings.
But I do have 7% Danny Lee.
Okay, that's good. I think I didn't get too much on DraftKings, but I got to some on FanDuel, so I'll take it, I guess.
Fist pumping on day one of PGA is a way to be frustrated for a long time.
Yeah, especially in the morning, because like a lot of the best golfers haven't even started yet. I'm pretty pumped to have some Johnny Vegas, so I've already been doing some fist pumping, but get it out of my system early, I guess, because I have yet to win anything in golf.
You try to get as many through, so you got the sweat on Friday afternoon, and then don't bother fist pumping until late Sunday in golf, man. It's a wild ride.
So I've learned. I had one real sweat. My first real golf sweat was a few weeks ago, and I was on top midway through the day on Sunday and lost money on the slate. So I know how that goes. More generally, how are you doing, Brian?
Good. I was watching a little March Madness. No, I'm not going to play the showdown tonight in the NBA, so I don't think we have any work tonight, do we?
Wow.
I'm not doing NHL. Done with that. I used to play NHL, but DFS got too hard.
I had just assumed that you were going to play the NBA, so I didn't even ask you to try to start later.
Don't tempt me. Don't get me to change my mind.
Do you ever play NBA Showdown?
I've played a bunch. My latest Sims for this year, I do have one for Showdown. It's not like fully flushed out, so okay. I haven't been playing much okay. on it.
Yeah. If you are watching the show on YouTube, you can probably see that Brian has on a Lolz hat. I've mentioned the Lolz podcast several times on these shows. It's one of my main sources of material when I'm interviewing people, because a lot of the guests that I've had on have also done Lolz podcasts previously, and in some cases it's the only appearance they've had, or one of only a few, so it's kind of the only place that I get to know pros. I'm a big fan of the Lolz podcast, but we'll get into Lolz a little bit later on. Let's start talking about your background a little bit for DFS. So to the extent that I understand your process, I believe it's one of the more precise mathematical processes of anybody that I know of in DFS. So I'm curious how you gain the skills that you utilize in your process. To start with, what kind of background do you have in statistics? Is it formal or informal training?
Informal. I went to school for sport management, and there's not a ton. Statistics even back then, Neil, like that wasn't even that huge. So like I had all the Bill James almanacs and who else was big back then? All this online sabermetric guys. I can't remember. Okay. There's some of the names are blanking on me, but
yeah,
I was into it. I was always into baseball cards, right? And like video games like Baseball Mogul that were simulators. And I played my dad's fantasy baseball league when I was 12. He didn't know any players, so like I was picking all the players and stuff like that. But all that stuff is generally not super helpful for beating TFS 20 years later, but it did. I did have an interest in those kind of descriptive statistics, right? More than predictive, which is what we really work in.
Right.
Since I was a young kid, and it was all informal learning. Except Bill James does have some practical formulas that you could still use in DFS. And sports betting.
When you say descriptive statistics, what do you mean by that? Like RBIs, or like what's a descriptive statistic?
Descriptive, yeah. So like 15 hits out of 50 at bats is a descriptive statistic. Would be whatever that batting average is.
Okay.
That doesn't mean it's predictive. It might be both. It might not. But they're two different things. You're trying to, where one is describing what occurred and one is trying to predict what occurred.
Okay, interesting. So it sounds like you actually you've been into sports your whole life. So you're in some ways similar to me in that I've always been really into sports. When I learned about fantasy sports as a kid, I got super into it right away. Um, and as you have, obviously as an adult, you've gotten into the statistics a little bit more, and you're kind of giving me a little bit of hope that I can still up my game a little bit more, because I haven't really. You've mentioned on some podcasts that you think people should take statistics courses is one place that they should start, and that's something that I honestly haven't really done yet. I think I have sort of an understanding of some basics, but I haven't taken any real statistics courses. So maybe that's something that's next for me. Do you think that was where you really upped your game? Were you already into it before you got into DFS, or was that something that you kind of got into more when you started getting into DFS?
I was into it slightly in DFS after poker. So I played poker for a living for about 8 years until Black Friday, which was 2011. And then when I realized poker wasn't coming back, and I needed money in a job, and I was still spending money at a professional poker player level, which I was young and naive. I'm like, well, maybe I'll take take a crack at beating sports betting. And so, like, clearly right away, you can, Google for 5 minutes. You're like, I'm going to have to figure out how to do this and this and this. And that was my first foray into predictive analytics and odds and converting odds, the winning percentages, and how does the VIG work and hold percentage and all that type of stuff. That lasted. My girlfriend at the time was like, I get obsessed with things, so like I spend constant amounts of time, and she was fed up with me sitting on my computer, researching all this stuff, and I would like make contacts with some professional bettors who were running syndicates at the time and stuff like that, and pick their brains. Luckily, on Twitter and stuff like that, and then the barrier for Americans is so hard. Like I was like, after a few months, I was like, man, now I'm gonna have to get all these accounts on these shady foreign sites, because the European sites would stop allowing Americans. And I'm like, do I really want to go down this? And then you learn about limiting and banning, and I'm like, what? Like, okay, so then what am I gonna do? And it's like, oh, well, you have to get a whole bunch of people to bet for you. I'm like, oh, that'll be easy. Like, oh no. So like, it started getting more and more unrealistic, and I just got a job. So
when you say that the barrier is hard for Americans, you're not talking about like the learning curve. You're talking about just getting limited and actually having access to making bets.
Yeah, and the books that were available back then, let's say 2013 or something, right? There was no DraftKings, FanDuel, Circa,
right?
Caesars, Bet365, on and on and on. So like Bet365, you couldn't bet on, but someone in England could, someone in Canada could, Pinnacle, so you'd have to. There are legitimate sites like Bookmaker that will. I don't want to like rep any books here. I don't really know everything about it, but this is what the rumors are. There are some legitimate foreign sites that you can bet on, but like I just wasn't interested in that, because I would play on poker sites that would go under, right, and I'd lose like 20 grand here and then like 10 grand here over the years. That didn't happen very frequently, and I'm like, well, what's stopping them from doing that?
Yeah.
On this, like, is this really? Am I even good enough? First of all, and I have to put in all this time and then do all this for what? To end up getting limited. So like, I kind of just gave up on it. But I learned a lot, and that was a long answer to your question of like, when did you first start getting into it? So with the more descriptive analytics of sabermetrics and stuff like that was the first, and then the predictive stuff was with sports betting that I didn't take too far, and then I just forgot about it all.
That was a long answer. It was a very good, interesting answer. So I appreciate all of that insight. The other question I had about your background is in programming. I listened to one podcast you did recently, might have been The Theory of DFS, where you mentioned that you're somewhat of an expert in Excel, and you also mentioned that you've been doing some programming in the R programming language. What kind of training do you have in terms of programming? Any formal training there, or is it all also informal?
Well, actually, I did have to take a class in college on Excel. Now I think back on it, but Excel I've always done for like the baseball fantasy stuff. Like that first league I was in, you had to do it by hand, right? You had to go get a Baseball Weekly and type in what all the numbers were, and then you put it into a spreadsheet. And so like I've always messed around with spreadsheets. But yeah, once you start taking it seriously, coding for me is not my forte at all. but Excel is kind of like a form of code, and it has a background VBA language that you can do some like more tricky like things with. But most of it was just go, how do you do this? Google. How do you do this? Google. And then you do it, and you're like, oh, I forgot how to do that. Google. And you just learn from Googling how to get what you want out of the code. So like I have not, and like my R skills are not that good. So like I learned early on that I could hire someone to like build out a better scraper than I could build for dirt cheap and faster.
Right.
And it's like, it's well worth my $20 or whatever, depending on the task, to just go on Upwork or Fiverr or whatever service you want to use and hire someone to do what I want. That has its pains, trust me, especially the more trust me, I know like the more complicated the task, the harder that becomes. But like there just was like no point for me to get that deep in it, especially in, we're talking I think I started in 2014. So like 2015, 2016. And in those days, most of my stuff was all on Excel, and it was everything from the projections all the way up to an optimizer, all in Excel. No outside anything.
Right. And you did, so it sounds like you did a lot of Googling to figure out how to do Excel. That was a question that I got last week for Josh, somebody asking, do you have a recommendation for where to start to learn Excel? And his answer was, not really. I just Google it. Is it the same answer for you?
My brothers are both coders, and they Google, and they're professionals. Like, and they know guys who got jobs, and like they then DM my brother, like, how do you do this? And he's like, here, just Google it. So like even the people who are working in offices coding for a living are using Google all the time too. So like it's all on there. You just have to, put a little, elbow grease into it.
Okay. And I think you said that you got involved in DFS. You started playing in 2014. What drew you into DFS? You mentioned that you were already kind of into sports and you had been in the poker world. So I guess it's kind of a natural transition, but tell me a little bit about how you discovered DFS and how you got into it.
Yeah, I remember specifically, it was my ex's brother at a party. We were at a family party, and he's like, check this out. And he brings his phone. He's like, look at this. And he was in like, a high place in one of the like huge NFL fields. And he wasn't getting that much money, but the thing that struck me was like 300,000 people play this. And that was all I really needed. Well, I needed a little more than that. But from there, I don't know, arrogant, I guess is the word, arrogant enough to think like, if 300,000 people are playing this for money, I could beat it. I could beat enough people to beat the rake. I think I'm obsessive enough that I would put the time and effort in that not enough people would be able to, where I could make some cash off it. But at that time I had a job. So I was like, I don't think I want to do it. And I was telling like one of my buddies who was into sports, I'm like, you got to get into this, man. I guarantee this is beatable. And like, no one was doing it. Told one of my brothers, I'm like, you probably make a decent amount of money doing this. And no one was going at it. And I think I might have my timelines mixed up. I think then A.E. Jones, the poker player who went over to DFS, won like $5 million in an NFL live final. And I knew him a little bit.
You won $5 million, did you say?
I think it was $5 million.
I didn't realize there were ever prize pools that big. That's crazy.
Yeah. Fact check me, but I'm pretty sure that's how much it was. And anyways, I knew him a little bit. And he was a poker player about the same time period I played. I'm like, well, if he can do it, maybe I should take this more seriously. And then once I did decide that I wanted to beat it, then I really obsessed over it and then went at it.
There's a Dan Byrne quote in a song lyric, "It ain't bragging if it's true." So you call yourself arrogant for thinking you can beat 300,000 people, but I think you've proven that to be the case over time. So I don't think you're arrogant. I think you were just, you knew that you probably had an edge on 300,000 people.
Well, I find that makes me more relatable to the little people. So I say, no, I'm kidding.
Right. But were you? So now obviously you can you win big contests all the time. You also win high stakes contests, which is an obstacle I have not overcome yet. But I'm curious, were you a winning player right away? Was there kind of a learning curve for you, or did you just kind of immediately have success?
I did all right. I did pretty well. There was no optimizer really in those days, so I was like a 1, 2, 3 lineup guy.
Okay.
And like I would have to put like an X. I'm remembering back. So I'd like optimize and they would give me one lineup. And like I want to do 2 lineups. So I'd X out one guy and then like there's my second lineup.
Was this in Excel or what you said?
All in
no
Excel,
optimizer.
yeah.
Okay. All right.
The optimizer was built in Excel, everything, projections were built. It was a behemoth of a spreadsheet. And eventually my computer couldn't handle it.
Wow.
It would slow the whole thing down. And totally unnecessarily, like I did whatever I was doing now, I just throw in the trash. It wasn't worth it. It was just the games were a lot easier back then. But I was doing pretty good. Winning thousands. And then I had a NFL weekend. My role was probably like I want to say like 15 probably at that. I built it up. I bet like 5 or maybe more. It was a lot for in play that weekend, and I didn't get my lineups in on time.
Oh no!
And I had just one dummy lineup.
I've watched your Kelly criterion video, and I don't think you would recommend playing 33% of your bankroll in that video.
No, I do all sorts of things I wouldn't recommend.
So did you have your spreadsheet set up before you even started? Like, is that something like you built out the spreadsheet first before you ever started playing DFS?
Yeah. Okay. I had this, I would come up with a theory and then try to like build out based on that. And it was all, and like I would come up with projections and stuff. And like, I'm trying to remember back, my NFL model back then was based on like, something with scoring time. I can't even remember, but yeah, I had like all these, these theories, and I just come up with some sort of model based off of that theory and just roll with it.
Okay. And you mentioned you started off being kind of a single entry player, not playing many lineups, and then you ramped up to playing 5,000 in a day. How long did that take for you to ramp up from like single entry to volume where you're putting in thousands at a time? And was that a one-time thing at that point, or was it did you quickly get into playing like thousands of dollars a day?
Well, after I blew that most of my roll, I'm like, well, I'm done. I'm gonna like, not that I'm not gonna stop. I just thought like you can't make back that kind of blunder.
Right.
Like I just thought I'm just gonna bleed this money away or whatever, but that didn't happen. Luckily, that was probably like not that long, probably like 6 months, maybe less to get up from, I remember $500 maybe. I didn't put much on there.
Okay. And then was it, from there on you were regularly playing? Like when did you start playing, more than 2,000 or 3,000 a day every day? How long would you say it took you to get to that point?
Not that long. In 2015, I think I binked a tournament.
Okay.
Probably my first one might have been late 2014. And then once then I felt I had enough of a role where I could, play with the money a little bit more. Okay.
So you're unique even among top pros in that you play DFS year round. You play every sport without many breaks. It's a running joke on the Lolz podcast that you never, maybe it's not a joke, it's a running commentary that you never take vacations because you are just tied to DFS and you don't want to, give up that kind of time. So it's not even clear to me when I look at your results what your best DFS sport is, because you're kind of on top of all of them. What do you think your best DFS sport is, and is it also your favorite DFS sport to play?
No, probably not. I would say probably MLB. Okay. Maybe then PGA. NBA until this year. God damn it. NFL is my worst.
Okay.
And my favorite is MMA, probably. I like MMA.
Interesting. Yeah. I know you binked a tournament. I was just watching a video that came out after you had binked a big MMA tournament. What was that, this year? 2021?
Yeah. I binked a few in MMA, 2 or 3 probably.
Okay. Yeah, I have not had any kind of success in MMA. if you played it out for 100 years, do you still think, what do you think would be your best sport if you continue playing DFS? Obviously,
Probably
we're not going to
probably
have
the same.
probably the same. All right.
Yeah.
I've always assumed that NBA over time would become my best sport just by, staying on top of it with late swap and stuff. Like, I feel like there should be more edge. And for me, at least, that's like, according to my rotor tracker, that's the most consistently, like, the most number in the top 1%. And it's kind of a downward curve from there. So for me, I've always thought it would be NBA, but I could see MLB makes some sense as well, just because the field plays it so wrong, at least in the large field stuff.
Lots of slates.
Yeah,
Lots
that's also true. That's a good point. Yeah, NFL, you're just even with 100 years, your sample size is going to be so small that even if you play it great, you might not realize your edge. So I guess that makes sense.
And less opponents.
Yeah,
you realize your edge much quicker, assuming all else equal, because you're playing against 300,000 opponents in NFL. Let's say you're average and you enter one entry, you're going to win once in every 300,000 years, in that one tournament, right? But in baseball, you're looking at like 15,000 opponents.
Right.
So it's significantly less. You're going to win more frequently, and you have just so many more slates. And oftentimes day night, there'll be like a 4-gamer in the afternoon and then 6 at night. So
yeah,
more slates, better. 162 games.
I like it. Last year was kind of my first year really having any kind of success in MLB. So I'm looking forward to finding out whether that was just a fluke or if I, actually improved my process. So that'll be looking forward to getting back to MLB for sure. Let's talk a little bit of process. So I mentioned earlier that I watched one of your videos recently. I think I've watched most of them at this point. But on your YouTube channel, you have it's under the name Brian Hooper. If you want to find Brian's YouTube channel, you have a playlist that I just recently discovered that you could separate it out. But you have a playlist called DFS Process that currently has 15 short videos. They're all about 10 to 15 minutes long, specifically about DFS and kind of helping people with their DFS process. I found them really interesting and would definitely recommend them to anybody who's serious about DFS. In fact, I've already been recommending them to people just in the month since I discovered the playlist. I've been, people DM me with questions, and a lot of time people DM me with like bankroll questions, and I'm like, I am not the guy you want to talk to about bankroll. So here's Brian talking about bankroll. You've actually got a couple, I think, bankroll management questions or videos on there. So I've been sending some of those videos to other people, but I also know, because I watch a lot of Lolz episodes, that you're willing to give helpful advice about DFS in general, but you're pretty guarded about the specifics of your process. You have a pretty involved process, and you don't really want to talk about all of the specifics of it, but I'd still love to hear about it in general. Before we get into it though, I'm just curious what that line is for you. Like where is the line of, this is what I am comfortable talking about, trying to help people out with DFS, and here's where I kind of draw the line. I don't really want to get into the specifics of my process.
It's like the Supreme Court's definition of pornography. I know it when I see it.
Okay.
Right.
Yep.
It's I know when to stop.
All right.
I think I'm skilled enough at this point, after a couple of years of being live on a show, that I know I'm going to talk about that.
Yeah, I definitely, of all the people that I watch on shows, I think that you seem to have the clearest understanding of, like, you immediately are just like, yeah, I'm not going to talk about that. Like, I think some people kind of fidget a little bit and like sort of answer the question or half-ass answer the question. I feel like you kind of just know, like, yeah, I'm not going to get into that process, and I can respect that, but I'll still try to ask you some questions.
Sure.
Before we do. This might seem obvious, but I'm just in case it's not for the audience, and I might have it wrong. What are the negative consequences that you are avoiding by not talking publicly about your process? What are you kind of scared of happening if you do talk about your process?
Well, I don't want someone else to do the same thing.
Okay.
I think pretty obvious. You don't want other people doing the exact same things. Like, if you could have the only optimizer on the planet, wouldn't that be pretty beneficial? If somehow you could pull that off. And then the moment you go, oh, you could do this thing called an optimizer on your show that goes out to thousands of people. Well, right. You're going to lose that edge to at least 10, 20 guys who are going to go out and code their own optimizer,
Yep.
Something like that.
Yep. That does make a lot of sense to me. The answer I was going for, what I was trying to get out of you, is I wanted you to say that you're afraid of creating a monster, because you said that on many podcasts that you're not afraid of, or it seems to me. So my impression of what you said previously is that you're not really afraid of creating players who are good at the largest field stuff. What we've kind of mentioned is that you're afraid of creating players that can beat you in high stake stuff. Is that more accurate, or is there some of both? You also don't want to create 100 people who can crush it at the large field stuff too.
Yeah, both for sure.
Okay.
Like when you go down that list, if you go into FC's lineup study, sort by 150. I'm sure you've done this.
Yep.
You don't want to add to that list.
Yep.
Well, actually, you don't want to add to that list with you giving out your best advice, for sure. If they want to do it and they're not very good, then you want to add to that list. But yeah, I don't want to add to the list of 150 either. But yeah, of course you don't want an oxen duck coming around and just winning everything before he transports to the different planet or wherever he's from. So
you're the only person that I know of that is in touch with Oxen Duck. Do you talk with him pretty regularly? Him or her? No. I guess I don't. You don't. Yeah,
I don't know him, her. I'd put money on it's a dude. Actually, no, that I don't. He might not be human. I think is probably the odds-on favorite.
All right. Yeah. Is he a robot or an alien or?
No, we think he is a trans-dimensional alien that morphs into this plane of existence, enters his lineups, and then morphs out.
Yep.
That's our best guess.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I've seen his lineups. I think his or her lineups. I am not going to make any assumptions. We do have some top female players as well. Although obviously the majority of DFS players are male at this point. I
don't think his species has a gender, so you're in the clear.
I'm in the clear there. Yeah. So I mean, I feel like when I first heard you talking about how guarded you were with your process, I didn't quite get it. I was like, is this paranoia? Because to me, I'm like, for every one person that can do what you do, I think there are 1,000 who can do what I do, or what Blender does, or those of us who don't create our own tools. But then the more I've heard you talk about it, the more I've kind of understood. I'm like, well, yeah, that's because you have such a special process that the more you give away, the more I think you're at risk of somebody figuring it out and really creating a monster, as if somebody could figure out what you do. Whereas, a lot of what we do is kind of just instinctual and having an understanding of the tools. It's not quite as specialized as what you do. So I think over time have had more of an understanding. And I'm like, yeah, it totally makes sense that you would want to cover up your process. It's also been successful for many years, and one of the most successful players in the game. So definitely makes sense to me that you don't want to create any monsters. I'm also curious, do you think that you have? Do you think you've realized this fear? Do you think that you've given out too much, and any players have come along that you can see that person took that from me, learned from me, and do you think anybody has become a monster based on your advice?
I don't know about a monster. I would guess some people have benefited that are playing high stakes or something. I don't know. People. Well, I got a lot of DMs over the years of people saying you've helped me so much and stuff like that. But I'm not sure if they're superstars or anything like that. But right. I imagine it helps a little bit. It's also, why would I want you in Blender, right, to add on to your already good process? You know what I mean? Of creating a monster, guys with a bankroll in this industry who could step it up a little bit more. Not that I'm saying I'm better than you two guys, but add to your already good process. You know what I'm saying? Why would that? Of course, I don't want to do that. That's kind of what I picture. The perfect player in my mind is a combination of someone who does something like me, with what petty theft does. At least the way he kind of describes it on our show. Okay. Where he's putting in a lot of hours a week and coming up with his own non-industry standard projections. Yep. And I think if I could get his numbers, I'd be destroying it, because I could plug that into my stuff and just click enter.
Because he doesn't even do ownership. I mean, we talked about that. He's, I think, one of the few top players, I would think. I guess there are a few that I've heard from who just doesn't factor in ownership at all, and obviously doesn't use the same kind of tools as you. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. That if you combine Petty's unique stuff that he spends a lot of time on with your more game theory optimized process, that would be that's where I think people should go. At least that's the direction I think people should go. I don't want to put in 80 hours a week. So I'm not, and even still, I don't think that even guarantees you
that knowledge of useful predictive power.
Yeah.
He just happens to be in like that 0.1% that can pull that off.
Not everybody can do what Petty does.
Right.
Clearly. Yeah. Yeah, I was gonna ask you about the 80 hours. Maybe I'll save that for later. Talking a little bit about the 80 hours question. It's a fun topic.
I had to say that to finish out that thought, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, and so back to just getting into process a little more. Oh, and I should say, so you don't want to say that you're better than me in Blender, and I won't speak for Blender, but I think I can look at the scoreboard and know that you're better than I am at DFS, and I think that makes sense. I mean, you've put in the work. You've got one of the best processes around, so I'm not ashamed of being not as good as you at DFS. As long as I can also make money, I'm okay with it. But let's talk about process just a little bit. So we'll start here. Do you use any simulations? Do you create your own simulations or use outside simulations for your process?
Only my own simulations. Yeah.
Okay.
No outside. The only outside simulations I know of are Run the Sims, I think, right?
Yeah, as far as I know, I don't know. Saber Sim, I guess. I don't know.
Oh yeah, I forgot about them. Yeah, no, I haven't checked them out yet. One thing people don't understand is optimizers, when you put randomness on it, is a simulation.
Okay.
There's very little difference, because it just a randomness, and it's on a normal all of them do normal distribution now, is very similar to doing a simulation in Excel. It's just each lineup is one sim.
Okay, interesting. So I guess that's different from, so my understanding of simulations, and obviously I've never done them, so you have a better understanding of this than I do, but so I've always thought of it as being like simulations simulate each full lineup. So it'll simulate each game in creating one DFS lineup. So like there's correlation built in automatically in the simulation in like, so I gave this example last week talking with Josh. So like if the Bucks game, if it's going to be a blowout, if the simulation, calls this game, simulates out a blowout game, all of the starters will lose minutes, all of the backups will gain minutes, and that there's kind of built-in correlations to the simulation. Is that maybe that's a specific type of simulation that I'm talking about? I have very little. I don't even know what a Monte Carlo simulation is here, so I'm kind of talking out my ass. But that has always been the difference in my mind between simulations and optimization, is that simulations build in kind of that correlation for you because they're simulating out the individual games. So
it's a specific type of simulation. So you could do either. You could do either or.
Okay.
You could do play-by-play simulations. You could do full game simulations. You could do fantasy point simulations, which was what an optimizer does.
Right.
You could do any mix in between. You could do. I'll make one up for you here, like your fantasy points based off of the score of the game, and then you take the score of the game and then simulate that, and then have the points based off of what the game plays out that way. Okay. Just based off of fantasy points. You could do that. That's an idea. And then you could make that correlated with the opponent somehow. You could do it a million different ways. But technically if you go to like Fantasy Cruncher's displays and you display the points, because there's a tab there where you could see what actually populated. Those are all just little simulations.
Okay. Huh. I've never thought about it that way, but that's really interesting. So you mentioned Fantasy Cruncher. Do you use an optimizer in your process?
So I do. I don't. What sport? Let's be specific.
Okay, interesting. So let's start with basketball. It's basketball season now.
Yeah. So I don't pre-lock. I don't use an optimizer.
Okay.
Post-lock, I'm trying to not use an optimizer, but it's way more complicated and it breaks and stuff. So lately, I have to go back to FC for late swap.
Okay. I was actually thinking about asking you that question about whether it would change after lock, because that would seem like it would complicate things with, some games locking and all of that kind of stuff. So that's interesting that you use FC after lock for basketball. Obviously, like golf, you don't really need to use FC then. Is that an example where you don't use any optimizer?
Yeah, I don't use optimizer at all for golf. I used to back in the day. Everything was through FC, but I guess if I did like Showdown or something, because I don't have my stuff built out for Showdowns. But yeah, no, I don't need it for that either.
Okay.
MMA, I don't need it for MMA.
So basically, you don't need it for sports that have a lock and there's no late swap. Is that like generally? Do you use it mostly for late swapping?
That's the goal. If I
Okay.
can, yeah, if I could do it all on my own, then I'll do it on my own. Yeah.
Okay. And you mentioned that petty theft, a big part of his process is creating his own projections, and that's kind of where he gets an edge. Do you create your own projections, or do you aggregate? What do you do with your projections?
I just want to say petty theft. This guy. He Carl Anthony Towns, right? When he had 89 yesterday or 2 days ago, whatever, he had like 80% of them.
Did he really?
Like every other top pro had like 5 or something like that. Anyways, what was the question? I'm sorry, that distracted me.
Sorry to make you angry about petty theft. If it makes you feel better, he beat me in a contest last week where he got first for 100,000. Yeah. I got second for 25,000. That's kind of a brutal beat there. So,
I saw that.
Yeah. So he does it to all of us. We all get pettied occasionally.
Does he need all the money?
I know.
Right?
Give it up, man. He already won 150,000. I DM'd him and I said, "Isn't it about time that you quit?" Like he mentioned that he's not as good late in the season for NBA. I was like, maybe it's time. Give it up. Getting tired of seeing him up there.
Yeah, I had a good answer for your question too, though. I can't remember what it was.
Do you create your own projections from scratch? Do you aggregate? Right. What do you do there?
Yeah. So when I first started, I created my own everything, right? Like I said, even up to the optimizer. And and projections was my main focus on everything. And there wasn't a ton available projections period back then, right? Like Basketball Monster, which their minutes were okay, I guess. I'm trying to think if was there even anything else. Like Roto Grinders had some, I think, just like flat fantasy points that didn't update that quickly. Anyways, and so I'm like, and I came from a sabermetric background, so I'm like, I could definitely come up with better stuff than this, and this will be a huge edge. Click, optimize one lineup, print the money, go on vacation.
Yeah.
So that's how I started. And then, over the years, as the projections got better and better, I've been phasing out my own and just honestly, it's laziness, tell you the truth. And I probably should go back and do my own, but they're getting so good that I don't know if it's worth it, because keeping that database and all that info up to date and logging the minutes and everything like that, it's a ton of work.
Yeah.
So like for how much benefit? Right. It's a cost benefit. Is it worth the time in your everyday life? Is that worth more? And so for some of these sports, I switched. So NBA, NFL, PGA, I still use my own. MMA, I still use my own. What sport am I forgetting? MLB. What does my sim do now? I switch every year. MLB, I kind of manipulate Cardi's numbers.
Okay. Let me take a quick break from this conversation with Brian Hooper to tell you to give us a like and subscribe so you can keep up with all of our shows, DFS offers, giveaways, and much more. Once you subscribe, hit that notification button to get alerts when our shows go live. Be sure to also check out our monthly podcast giveaway. Just subscribe to our podcast channel and leave a 5-star review with your Awesemo username or Twitter handle to be entered to win a free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum. And the projections that you do on your own, I believe you publish them on your site. Do you always make them publicly available, or is that kind of a sometimes thing?
Oh yeah, so I do NBA props. That's like pre-lock. I have like an old my old prop number stuff still working. I don't use those numbers in my in my simulations for lock. Yeah.
Okay.
But they're still pretty good. I don't know what the numbers are on they are, but I imagine they're probably the best free props out there. I don't do them every day though, just like when I have time.
Okay. It's interesting to hear me say that you say that you don't always do your own projections anymore, because it was, I think within the last year, you had a Lolz episode where you were talking with Pete, and he was like, I don't think many people do their own projections, and you were dumbfounded by like the suggestion that only a few people do their own. You were like, no, all the top pros do their own projections at that time. Did you kind of switch it up and realize that, maybe I don't need to do this after like kind of learning over time that most of the top pros are not doing their own projections? Was that part
No,
of the
unrelated.
Okay.
It was just pure laziness. Laziness is a little too hard of a word. Like I said, how much EV was I getting compared to their numbers?
Right.
It just didn't seem worth it in some of those sports. So exit out. Just use their stuff. Ownership. I don't do NBA ownership anymore. Like I still have it. I could still do it. Like, and plus, like, I mean, I have my old model, but even if I didn't, I could build one in 5 hours. I have the skills.
Right.
I just don't want to keep up with it. And then also with simming takes time, right? So like I have to get my process down perfectly so where I can sim it fast enough with late NBA news.
Right.
And going and doing and updating all my ownership and stuff like that, like it's not as much. I'd much rather just use Awesemo's. And I don't necessarily use Awesemo's ownership in my sim process.
Okay.
Anyways, like kind of switched more to like a GTO approach, which doesn't really need a ownership percentage.
Interesting. Okay.
But
so that surprises me to hear that. So GTO, game theory optimal. I would think that ownership plays a big part in that. Maybe if I push you too hard on this is where you're going to say I don't want to get into it. But
yeah, I probably will. But like, I'm trying to think of. Honestly, this is one of the part of not making monsters. When I listened to Nerdy Tenor's podcast with Blender, and he said he uses. I think he was talking about the Nash equilibrium or something like that. And he was saying, you don't, what was the phrase he used? Like you could play optimal instead of exploitive.
Okay.
And I said, I think I tweeted out, I'm like, you can't do that in DFS. And then I thought about it for a day and I'm like, and I made out this is how I do it, is like, if you read, The Mathematics of Poker, or even like Van Neumann did this. He wrote the original game theory book. You make a small game and then beat that. It's like my ownership video, like my first videos on ownership.
Yep.
And so I just made a small game and beat that to show how ownership works. Because even back then, Neil, people didn't. A lot of people, I'd say at least 30% of people still didn't think ownership mattered at all.
Right.
At least 30%, probably more than that with the public, probably 70%. And so anyways, so like I made up my own little mini game and I'm like, oh shit, he's right. And then from there, I like adjusted things and like, I don't even need to do this ownership piece anymore.
Okay.
And then blah.
So what I'm understanding is, it's so like my way of playing, which is very focused on the ownership, you would call an exploitative style rather than a game theory optimal style.
Yes.
Okay. That's cool. Yeah. Those are, terms that I guess I didn't fully understand. I've always kind of assumed that exploitative was kind of within game theory optimals, like kind of a part of it. But that's really interesting. Yeah, your ownership video I would definitely recommend to anybody. You talk about how ownership is more important at the lower ownership level. So like there's a bigger difference between 1% and 5% than there is between obviously like 60 and 70%. And you kind of talk about that, and I found that really fascinating. So I would definitely recommend that to anybody who's trying to learn DFS. Is really fascinating stuff. The Nerdy Tenor video, I remember that was after, I think you did a show shortly after that came out. The Nerdy Tenor did an interview with Jordan Cooper on the theory of DFS, and then you did a show maybe later that day or the next day, and Rinpak was in your chat talking about how much he gave away, how much information he gave away. So that was funny to me, and I was kind of like, man, but that was kind of where I first started thinking, like, can anybody do what he's doing though? I didn't understand half of what Nerdy Tenor said. Like your average guy probably can't copy that, but I guess that's, again, your fear isn't guys like me who don't have any background in statistics and programming. It's the guys that do that you're kind of a little bit more worried about, I suppose.
I said that on the show. I think a commenter's like, he's like, I'm not going to do any of this. I'm like, I'm not worried about you, guy.
Right. Yeah.
You're not the guy I'm worried about.
Yep.
Yeah.
Makes sense. And so your tool. So we talked about you have some programming experience. You're pretty good with programming, but how much of the programming do you do yourself? Do you hire programmers for most of it?
Yeah.
I mean, I know that you do for some, but what's the ratio there?
I do like 1% of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And also, do you need to understand kind of the programming, how it works, to be able to know what's possible and to like kind of direct other people to do things?
That is a problem, because that's why I like doing mine in Excel. All the stuff in Excel I did a whole bunch of. I've done a bunch of models with our mutual pal Steve Buzzard. And in Excel, the benefit is you could see everything so easily when it breaks or when you screw something up. And in R, it's tough to see it working that way and what's broken and what's not. So that is kind of lame. I mean, the GTO way of programming would be to learn the code and do it all yourself.
Right.
But I didn't do that. And, because I also too, like, I want my ideas, like, let's do it now. Like, I want to see if this will work,
Yeah.
Is this what am I thinking? Is this right or is this wrong? So, I guess it's impatient, but I don't know. You gotta react fast in DFS, right? The games are changing, they're getting harder. So spending 6 months learning R is not, something I'm super interested in.
I know this isn't what you mean when you say you've got to be fast, but it kind of brings me back to a question that I had a minute ago, which is, so with your simulations, if you get breaking news for NBA like 5 minutes before lock, are you able to then like run a sim that fast? Like, is 5 minutes too short of a time period? You can do 5?
I can do 5.
Okay.
And I can half-ass 3.
Okay.
It's pretty quick.
Okay.
But I made my NBA model is very simple.
Okay.
My NFL model takes 20 minutes for 2,000 sims.
Okay. Yeah. And that, I mean, luckily for NFL, you typically have all of the news an hour and a half before lock. So
it's still not enough time, honestly. I have to speed it up. But with the NFL, I think you need a more complicated model. And it's best for MMA and PGA.
Okay. Interesting.
Because you could just let it run.
Right.
You got a full day. I mean, in the PGA, they don't tell you who's hurt anyways, unfortunately.
That's true. Right. Yeah, MMA, I suppose occasionally you get fighters out due to, I mean, I guess maybe that's just more of a COVID thing.
That's what I was just gonna say.
Outside of COVID that frequently.
I was just gonna say that. Yeah.
Yeah. And are you, so I didn't, I'm curious if you, are you a 150 lineup guy, or are you if you're, doing 2 different contests that are 150 max each, do you do 300 lineups? So how do you approach that?
I would say for the majority of my career, like vast majority, 95%, it's 150 and enter.
Okay.
I got in an argument, I think, on Twitter a while ago. I said, like, the difference between your 200th lineup and your 20th lineup is not as much as you think. And they're like, oh, no, yes, it is. So you don't know how to play DFS. And I mean, I don't think there's a huge difference between those lineups. So entering them into 2 is, I think, completely fine. Like I say this on Lolz all the time, if the DFS gods came down from heaven and gave you the perfect process and projections for prediction, without actually giving you the answers, you would just make 150 and enter that and everything. But we don't have that, right? We're guessing here. So you have to be a little bit humble. And then I think entering 300 is with the benefit you get in diversification, the theoretical EV you may or may not have lost because you're not a perfect predictor is fine. I don't like doing it. I don't want the FOMO of, I won 5K in the jab step and then lost 100K in this,
Do you do so? I've asked this question a few times of other guests. Do you enter contests where the top prize is like $5,000?
It depends. Yes.
Okay.
But it depends.
All right.
If I'm running hot and I really adjust based on how poorly or well I'm doing. And if I'm just entering everything, I'll just enter everything. Okay. So that would include the 5K ones. I don't know how much plus EV they are. There's a lot of good players in those, but yeah, I wouldn't be opposed to it. I've done a bunch.
Okay. Yeah, I've got 300 golf lineups going currently. So I'm more on the side of just run out a bunch of lineups and hope to win something. But that's also because I don't enter stuff where the prize isn't at least, typically I don't enter stuff where it's under like 50,000. I did play PGA FanDuel today as well. Sometimes I'll go obviously lower, but I'm never gonna. I don't enter contests where I would have regrets winning it. so I don't really run into that as much.
I think the GTO strategy is adjusted based on contest and contest size.
Yep.
I've put a decent amount of thought and work into that, and I think it's harder than people think it is. At least through this kind of more of a like a simulation algorithmic approach. Like if you're just sitting there building by hand, and maybe it's not hard for you, but like I think it's a lot harder than it looks. And if you just like look at the NBA's big one every night compared to the $15, 30,000 people in it versus the $700, whatever, 300 people in it. Mm-hmm. The best lineup wins is about the same one in both of them at this point. Like, yeah. So like, you kind of just got to pray your best lineup happens to be in that big one. Yeah. The way things are going. Now, granted, the GTO approach is probably to figure out some sort of solution for mass entering across multiple contest sizes appropriately. But like the way it's been playing out lately, it doesn't matter. You just need your best lineup to luckily be in both of them.
Yep. Yeah. So I definitely, if I'm entering like a qualifier, like a DK Live qualifier kind of thing, I'm definitely going to enter the same lineups I have in the other one, because it's always shocking to me how good the top lineups are. Even in those, like there's like 80 people in the field, and it'll be like nearly the same score as the score it takes to win the 30,000 field. It's I think some of the high stakes players are pretty good. So yeah, I definitely have found that to be the case as well.
I think that one of the biggest pieces of alpha I guess I could give without giving away too much away is like the portfolio theory is piss poor in DFS, like commentary and advice. I don't really want to get into it, but I would definitely say like look down there if you want, and I think you could figure out some interesting ways to enter your lineups.
The portfolio theory?
Yeah, like a portfolio, like of looking at all your entries as like one thing. Like, okay, how do I make the best of this one thing?
Okay. Interesting. All right. So we won't dive into it just yet. Maybe you'll get into it on another video for Lolz or something, figure out a way to explain a little bit more without giving away too much edge. I'm trying to figure out if I understand what you mean by that exactly. All right. Maybe I'll figure it out later, and it'll click later on what you mean exactly by that. I think so. So when you say the portfolio theory, I think you mean like I have 30% of this guy across all my lineups. I have 20% of this guy across all my lineups. Is that kind of what you mean? Like building out a portfolio of like players as opposed to, no, you're shaking your head.
No. Yeah. Lineups.
Okay, all right. All right. Well, maybe you'll put out another video to explain this, or maybe you really are.
I probably will, but not for a while.
All right. Sounds good. One more, a listener question here that we'll see if we can get an answer out of you. Wanted advice on creating ownership projections. He says, I know he makes his own for PGA. Does he make them for other sports too? And where would he recommend starting if you want to make your own ownership projections as well?
Yeah, I do ownership projections I do on my site. I do MMA and PGA because it's easy. I do it anyways, and I could do it whenever I want. NBA, I have my old stuff, but I don't see the point. It's not. We went over this already. So for building your own, just download a bunch of CSVs with ownership, map them up with. This is going to be the simplest. It won't be better than going to Awesemo, but it'll get you on the right track. And then map them up with the other data points for that day, fantasy points, projections, whatever you can think of. And then put all those in one column, and then just run a regression on the ownership for that day. And then you could see in the regression numbers, and you could Google regression, linear regression, what was what had a low p-value, which means it's very unlikely to happen at random chance. What was the R value for each statistic that you did? Some of them will not be predictive at all, and you could remove them and you just do process of elimination. And then from there, you start Googling more stat tricks. I can't, for lack of a better word, on how to even make that more and more accurate and get your R up to something that is worthy and predictive of not using Alex's numbers, which is not that easy to do anymore, but you can do it. Like Steve Buzzard, he thought his ownership numbers were better than Awesemo's before he joined the team. And I think he was right. I think he had the data on it.
Yeah.
So you could definitely do it. And if you don't want to spend that money, then you just got to put in the legwork. But that's and you could do it. You could do it a bunch of other ways too.
Right.
Mine is basically that process, but I've done it for many years, so I have a lot of tricks in the bag to get my R up pretty high on some of these sports.
Right.
But yeah, that's all you really need to do. Mine I could do with like simulations a little bit too, and mess with it. But there's a couple ways to do it.
Blender has said to me that he thinks that it's largely based on the projections of a site. Like, so the ownership projections that come from Awesemo, he would say largely come from the Awesemo projections. So players that they project better are also going to have higher ownership projections. I don't feel like that's always the case in my experience with Awesemo. I think there are some times where I get a lot of a certain player that is only projected for 5% ownership or something. Do you think that that is a big part of it for like the public ownership ownership projections? Do you think that a big part of it is the projections on that site itself, or do you think that that's just kind of one component of it?
Well, let me answer that and then give you a tip too for building these out. So if you do what I said, you start building up this historical database of ownership projections with the players accompanying fantasy points from Awesemo or wherever you get your number from and Awesemo. Then when you run the regression, it'll tell you how much of that number is predictive of this ownership number. And I guarantee it's correlated and helpful to your R to leave Awesemo's numbers in there. So Bales, John Bales, who writes the Fantasy for Smart People books, the series, right? Everyone knows Bales, right?
I haven't read it, but yeah.
Anyways, right. in one of his NBA ones, I remember reading this years ago when I was making models at the time, and he said NBA totals, team totals aren't correlated to player fantasy points. And he's right, but he's wrong. So like if you did that process of fantasy points and the team total and run a regression on those two columns, the R is going to be extremely low and it's going to feel like it's not predictive. But if you divide that total by the amount of minutes in the game and multiply it by the player's minutes, it becomes extremely predictive now, right? So it's how you use the number.
Okay.
So you have to be creative in figuring these things out. You don't just go, Awesemo predicts 65. Oh, it doesn't seem like that has a good R. Well, maybe there's another way to do it. Maybe value. Maybe that divided by salary. Maybe something else.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think that's, if I were to ever try to make my own projections, the first place I would look is team totals to figure out, kind of how a projection differs from the player's typical average projection. So that's really interesting. That's a good tidbit. I feel like those were helpful answers about that question. I wasn't sure if you were going to want to answer that question about how to start making ownership projections, but I guess it's general.
If there weren't good ownership projections out there, I probably wouldn't have. But it's like at this point, go ahead. I don't care. And also I'm like moving on to more GTO strategy anyways. So hopefully maybe the exploitative way is like less EV, and then I can get more people doing a less EV strategy or something. Maybe I'm doing it for my own Machiavellian benefit here.
That makes sense. I would believe that. I've watched enough of your videos. I wouldn't put it past you. So getting into some more general DFS questions. This one I really want to ask you about this because I've brought you up specifically in asking this question to other pros a few times, other guests that I've had on here about the concerns about DFS as a profession dying out. Being a professional DFS player, you've kind of expressed that you have concerns about the edge shrinking and or the game shrinking because now sports betting is kind of becoming a bigger thing across all states, and it's pretty clear that DraftKings and FanDuel are kind of maybe more interested and maybe can make more profit in some ways off of sports betting. It might be a faster growing industry than DFS. So you've kind of in both of those ways expressed some concerns. I think you said on a video recently that you would not recommend, if somebody came to you asking about how to become a pro at DFS, you would not recommend it to them. I believe you said on one Lolz episode. Now, I don't know how serious you are about that, so I wanted to have you on and ask you about that, whether it's a real concern for you. Like, do you really think that the edge is shrinking enough that, to start now, you're too far behind and you probably shouldn't give it a shot? Or is it, something that you're kind of expressing a potential concern? How big is that concern for you?
Yeah, that's a lot of questions I want to answer on that. But like at the end, we'll go first. Like if someone asked me, well, I think that's just kind of like a law of averages of like someone come up to me like, should I be an MLB pitcher? I like, probably you shouldn't. Like, are you 6'6" and can you throw like 100 miles an hour at 16 years old? Well, maybe you should go at it. You know what I mean? It's like, are you like super obsessed with things? Have you been like really good at something typically nerdy, video games, card games, an instrument, maybe, whatever, you know who you are, like, right. If what I'm talking about, like, and you can't be like, do you ever have that friend who thinks they're good at something and you're like, he's not that good. He's not that good. Yes. Right. Or whatever, like even like darts or pool or something, like, so who you are kind of, I think. So if like you are that type of person, I hope I answered like this on the show, and then yeah, take a crack at it. But like, but for most people, you're not making, it's a very highly competitive industry and most people won't succeed. So therefore law of averages, you probably shouldn't enter, was more like I was going for there.
Okay.
Now with the future of DFS and sports betting, I think it's naive to think that it's going to remain, the super plus EV thing. I think it's gotten less. Now, granted, I'm in a downswing, so like I'm probably more pessimistic than like Alex just wins $1 million, then just he's just doing like $1 million parlays and just
Travis Petty right now is saying it's easier than ever.
Yeah, Oxen Duck when he comes to the planet eventually, he's be like, no, it's not hard. You're just doing it wrong.
Yeah.
So like, what do I know? But like, I think it's just naive the way poker went, with the way the sites are getting better and better information and hiring sharper and sharper people. That is just like a foregone conclusion. Blender's argument is a solid one of just like, there's a lot of dummies, Brian. There's a lot of dummies. Like there's a lot of people who are just going to enter in. I think they're going to outweigh the VIG. Fine. But like, there was a lot more dummies before, and the more the better. And I think that number is going to shrink. And that leads me to like the second part of that answer is I'm worried about regulatory capture and the government protecting these few companies against competition. And then the promotions dry up, the rake increases, and there's nothing we can do. Maybe they start kicking out the winning players. It's already happening on certain sites that we shall not name. And I don't want to name them. Trust me. I don't care about Awesemo's advertisers. I don't want to be named. But anyways, I think all that mixed together. And listen, we're gamblers. We look at things on a probabilistic scale. I think it's more likely that it gets down into the digits where variance isn't worth it, even if it is plus EV. I think I'm saying I would say 60-70% likely on that, 30% miscellaneous, whatever, 5% chance it stays pretty darn good where enough people are making a living. And I'm not in the poker world anymore, but I'd like to see like how many people are actually making a living there. I think also DFS and poker are different because you could solve DFS a little easier than poker. It's not like just you one-on-one, remembering all this GTO info, like you kind of are clicking buttons more. So I would say what I just summed up, I'm like on the probabilistic scale of outcomes, I definitely am more pessimistic and think eventually, I don't know, 5 years or something, there's a very good likelihood that for most people, the variance, even if it's plus EV, won't be worth it.
Okay. So you're, I was going to ask you about your time frame here. What you kind of think, you think 5 years is about what you would guess, where it's kind of like, do you think you'll be done playing DFS in 5 years?
I don't know. I'm trying to think. Like look at DraftKings, right? With their stock, Jason Robbins' attitude in his comments.
Yeah.
Like he's desperate to win. He really doesn't. He really does not liking that stock dropping. Clearly, by his comments, they said delete these tweets. He's already said they don't want winning players, right? He was talking about sports, but that doesn't matter. It carries over. And
although it is a little bit different in that they don't take rake from sports bettors, right? So they lose more. They don't lose necessarily as much from winning players in DFS. Would you agree with that?
It could be in the mind of the person, the perception of the person's mind. He could say, no, you are this is a lot of poker companies think this. No, you're a winning player, so we need to kick you out so the losing players don't lose as fast. And then they keep buying in. It depends on your point of view. Right. I think it is more like a Pareto principle graph where it's just 80% of the outcomes are from 20% of the people. And if you lop off a certain percentage, you're just kind of zooming in on a Pareto graph. If people can picture that or just Google it.
Yep.
But anyways, it's his mindset. Right. It doesn't matter. Like he's saying, it doesn't matter. Like I don't want winning players. So like, I don't care. I just want to make money essentially.
Yep.
So like that. Okay. Well then the rake going to levels that can't be beaten is on the table it follows that logic. Right. Yep. So, like they're close to a duopoly at best.
Yeah.
In the country. And so once he gets to that point where he's like, I need to make some damn money, even it might not be in his best interest. I need the numbers to go up for the quarterly meeting or something like that. Who knows what they'll do? How far away is that? I don't know, not that far away. Maybe they fire him, but I wouldn't even be too optimistic that they would get somebody else in that would do anything any better.
Right.
And again, it's on a scale, like I could be wrong, whatever. It could be some other outcome. It could be some other outcome. I think they should do like the DFS pools, but they're not legal in every state. Like the sports betting pools, like they're legal in Colorado. I know. I don't know if they're legal you're in Minnesota, I think, right?
I'm in Minnesota. Yeah.
Do you guys have the pools you can buy into?
I don't think I know what you mean.
There's a pools tab on DraftKings website. And so it's kind of like DFS, but with like pick'em pools, like,
okay.
There's free ones you can look at.
Yeah, I'll check it out.
And check it out.
I'm in I did the Onyx tier
me too.
bracket, which is under that same tab. It's the first time I've ever seen that.
I think I went 0-3 to start.
I started off 3-0. I literally did zero research. I watched your video after creating it. Your video from yesterday. I didn't use any of the info. I went through and I like picked, not at random because I know I can see the seeds and stuff, but like largely I don't know these teams. I know nothing about them. Right. And I started off 3-0. So we'll see how that goes.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I'm sorry for your 0-3 start after. I mean, you guys, you had a pretty good process. Did you use the lineup that you created on Lolz yesterday?
Well, Pete entered it into something. I don't know ESPN, but yeah, no, mine was different whenever I put mine in. I did like 3 or 4 of them, but it was all basically the same with a couple switches.
Okay.
Houston kind of going kind of far. It just seemed like some of those spots were like no brainers. And we're also assuming ESPN's ownership is sharp. It probably is though. It's probably straight from their database.
You think like as people are entering their pools, they're updating it? Like they see what people have done? You think they really? Maybe.
I mean, I think ESPN probably was. I think ESPN's probably just updates it once a day. Like, here's the pools. Here's what everyone entered.
Yeah. True.
So yeah, if it's sharp, then some of those plays were just like you can get a favorite with 17 points of leverage or something on the money line. It's like just take them.
Yeah. All right. So you think pools might be more in the future? Maybe they need to just go different directions a little bit to try to increase their profit.
I think the only solution is competition. You need people driving. This is why I hope Super Draft succeeds and these other smaller sites, but they don't really seem like they can get legs. Fantasy Draft was really good, but COVID just ended them. They had a great site, man. I love that site. That when that went under, that was a bummer. But if CBS or some big player, they almost jumped in a few years ago. If some of these big players don't jump in, there's not going to be enough competition for them why wouldn't you just do whatever you want? And like, there's no other game in town.
And like you said, duopoly right now is kind of the best case scenario. Like in a lot of ways, FanDuel just doesn't care. They've kind of thrown in the towel.
It's the worst kind of duopoly. It's a heavily regulated market.
Yep.
It's not like Legos. You know what I'm saying? Like, who cares if Legos is a monopoly, right? It's because they have the protection of the government. So like, you can't start a DFS site, right? We'll get arrested. And like, okay, let's do it the legal way. Okay, well, you need $2 million in each state to just even apply. And then you need to know people and pay lobbyists to get it involved. It's like, oh, it's not worth it, So like, someone like, even the means, like, even if like Awesemo got bigger and wanted to invest in that, like, is it even worth it? Cost them an arm and a leg. Like, so competition's artificially lower with all these regulations. And since it's a sin industry, no one cares. They're like, you guys are just degenerate gamblers. So who cares?
Yeah. You want to hear more opinions like this, listen to Lolz, because Brian gets into this pretty frequently on Lolz. I know your opinions on regulations and things. I think that the most optimistic thing you said though was CBS could get involved. ESPN could get involved. Like, there's
ESPN is involved.
ESPN
owns DraftKings, basically.
Oh, do they really? Okay. So that's not
they were heavy early investors.
Okay.
Yeah.
Didn't realize that. But so maybe the best case scenario for us is that more companies get involved, I guess, is
right. And it's not going to be like user-friendly companies, but like, at least it'll be, at least they can't just do whatever they want.
Let me take a break from this conversation with Brian Hooper to tell you about our sponsor, No House Advantage. No House Advantage is bringing you a different way to enjoy DFS with player props contests. It's 100% peer-to-peer to help level the playing field. With over 500 player props offered, and all new users get a $25 deposit bonus with promo code Awesemo. That's AWESEMO. No House Advantage has mass entry capability and big prize pools. Beat your friends, not the house. Use our No House Advantage projections and optimal lineup tool to help you take down big prizes. Download in the App Store or play on nohouseadvantage.com. Yeah, so I guess that's what we're hoping for. Always downer to think about the possibility that DFS will not be a game where you can have an edge in 5 years. And you also mentioned on a show recently that maybe the time frame might be even shorter for guys like me who are not doing our own stuff. Like maybe I need to start doing a little bit more of what you're doing, creating my own stuff to maintain an edge in 3 years. Like maybe we'll get to the point where just using like the approach that I use, that Blender uses, that even like guys who we're not creating our own stuff, maybe we are going to need to update our approach to stay on top of the game as it gets better.
I think you guys should stay exactly where you're at. Don't do anything. You're fine.
Yeah.
Everything's gonna be fine. Just I would think this is just my personality. Like, I'm constantly tweaking and coming up with, well, what about this? What about this? And then, maybe I should go back and use my numbers, not theirs. And maybe there's a combination of things I could do here. And every year my process is almost completely revamped, even if I had a great year.
Wow.
And so I guess that's my advice, but like, maybe that doesn't work for everyone, but I would definitely put some time into coming up with a new strategy. Like, I don't know, like you have to have some sort of goal, like, obviously,
right? Like
something like that. You're going like, okay, how am I going to do this? What am I going to do? And then like put all that into action. So like, that's harder than it is, but like I would definitely do something.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned that you're pretty obsessive, and you've said on the podcast, and you just kind of said that like you change your process like weekly, which to me, I have an issue with. If I am winning, then I'm like afraid to change my process sometimes. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I play every slate differently, but like for Showdown in particular this year, I had a great NFL Showdown year, mostly at the beginning of the year. And then it was like later on in the year, I was kind of like, well, I know that I could improve this, like make different groups in Fantasy Cruncher, for example, but I've had so much success where like I would have maybe precluded some things, or I don't know. So I was like kind of afraid to change my process, but I think that's good advice, that like you do kind of need to always be changing and improving, even if you have had success with what your process is. And that's something that I'm still I still grapple with that. Like, I'm like, well, but I've been doing well. So do I really want to change what I'm doing when I'm doing well? So like right now I'm on kind of a downswing. So I'm like, maybe I need to change, I'm more open to changing things when I'm on a downswing, but it sounds like for you, that's not even really a consideration. You're kind of changing things either way.
That seems like a mental bias that like would be in Fooled by Randomness. I don't know if you ever read that book, but like it would work the opposite way too. So like if you were doing poorly and then you change something and you did poorly, and then so then you go back the next night and you change it back and then you do poorly. Like, oh, I should have done that one that day and then the other one the other day. Maybe it was the wrong day to switch. So like it works the same way whether you're winning or losing. So like it's actually can make more sense to change when you're winning. She's like, oh, I just won. Maybe I was getting lucky and this new thing's even better. Now I'll change and get lucky again on this new thing and win 2 days in a row. So like you could rationalize it either way. It doesn't really matter. It's really like, are you providing more plus EV process?
Right.
If the answer is yes, you do it, right? Like if we were robots. But like if you're gonna ruin your night, if you're gonna be in a bad mood, you know, and all these real life issues, you know, then don't be like me. But like you could easily rationalize either way, doing it after you just won or after you just lost, in both ways.
Yep. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And obviously it's rational to know that like you should be making changes for the better even when you're winning. So what you're saying makes a lot of sense. It is, like you said, just kind of a mental bias sometimes for me. And I think a lot of people struggle with that, kind of like not wanting to change things that are working. But
I think the hardest thing is doing it in the off season.
Yeah.
Which is when you should be doing it then, because then you don't care.
Right.
And you put in the work. But like during the off season, you're playing another sport. You don't care. The data's not handy. You didn't save enough from the season to redo it. So like if you are a go-getter and prepared and saved all your data, then just do it in the off season.
So this is leading nicely to my next question, which is getting back to the chess is okay quote or claim that you need to work 80 hours a week to be successful at DFS. I don't know if that's actually what he said. That's kind of what we've been throwing around as what he said. He just said something along the lines of when he was on top of his game at DFS, he was playing 80 hours a week. And that's been kind of a regular conversation that DFS players have had. Some pros have been like, yeah, I do work 80 hours per week. Others have been on the other side of it, said you don't really need to work anything close to that. I'm curious what side you fall on. Do you think working 8 hours a week is necessary to be on top of the DFS world?
It's kind of like when I thought every top player did their own projections. I would have said 80's too much. You definitely don't need that. But like I got Steve Buzzard disagrees with me. Petty Theft disagrees with me. I think someone else told me too, they disagree with me. And so, hey, maybe I'm wrong there too. But I personally thought 80's a little ridiculous. I mean, when you add everything together, like maybe like, you know what I mean? Because there's a lot, like for NBA, you're there all night, all the way up to lock. You're there at least an hour or two before game time. And like you want to set up your spreadsheets, make sure that everything's working. And if you're going to do your own numbers, like for minutes, not even projections, you probably you have to enter, you know, if you're playing 4 sites or whatever, you get that'll take you half an hour at least. Right. You know, what else do you got to do? You know, check promotions, you know what I mean? Like see if you got to maybe, you know, email somebody. Are you answering DMs from other players? Do you count that? You know, like if you're counting everything, does my podcast count? Does the 2 minutes of preparation me and Pete do every day count? Right. You know, so like, yeah, sure. Okay, fine. 80 hours. I mean, I would guess it's probably more like 50 and then like high weeks are 80. I mean, I was surprised that episode and that specifically that comment was so like viral throughout the industry. Anyways, obviously not on the internet, but like through the DFS nerd industry, everyone had an opinion on it. So yeah. But I just have a rule of thumb. Like when you know, someone who's clearly like smart or I respect, you know, completely disagrees with me, I just okay, maybe I'm wrong on this, and I'm gonna think about it. And my opinion wasn't like that, you know, set in stone, like no 80 hours is negative EV for sure, you know. I was just like, I just think that was probably an exaggeration, and I don't think you need that to be the best, you know. And I'm still you know, whatever, 50-50.
Okay. So that was so you mentioned that you think that you work maybe 50 hours a week, up to 80 hours on the high end. Is that about where you're at right now, you think?
No, that's what I was thinking he does. I
Oh,
was
okay,
thinking
okay.
he
What do you think
exaggerates.
you're at then?
I'm at like 50 minutes. No. I probably, I don't know, the way what I just described is what I do. So
Right.
like 2 hours before I'm at my computer, all the way through lock, enter. I'll probably do an extra hour or something before lock, depending, like reviewing lineup study or some other thing, making sure because I live between two places, so like I got to make
Okay.
sure my computer's working, right? And mine's in the simulations beat up your computer, so I like to
Yeah.
run it, make sure it's not gonna crap out on me. So however many hours that is, I don't count.
Okay. And do you also, your process, you obviously done a lot of the legwork already because you've already, created the simulator and, created your model. So do you think that you save yourself a lot of work? And you also hire programmers to do certain things. So maybe you can work less because you've hired other people to do parts of your process in terms of the programming, and because you already have a program in place. Do you think that's kind of saved you some time there too?
That's another good point. Are they doing all their own programming and stuff? And like,
Right.
so like that would significantly add to the time. I don't know how much Chess was actually using a process like mine. It sounded like a little bit, but not a ton. He called himself the API. So like for people that don't know, like that's where a lot of times you can just get the data automatically into whatever you're using, Excel or any stats program. You can just pull the data in quickly. So like that's where I get my sportsbook numbers from DraftKings and everything, so I could price them. I pay an API service. So like, but so he's saying he's the one who's doing all that.
Right.
He's the human API. So
Right.
who knows how much of the coding and stuff he's actually using? But like, but that would add time. I mean, I guess it is. It's the perception. Now that I'm like thinking all the reaction and taking it all into account, I think the reaction of the DFS community was overblown. It actually is a lot more hours than people realized, and I was wrong about that. And but I would probably say 80 was probably an exaggeration for his average number. So like he's doing 100 hours a lot of times and 60 other. Like, I don't know. I don't know if I buy that, but obviously I could be wrong. Yeah. So it is a ton more hours than I thought, than people think.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely true. And yeah, for me, it also comes down to like, what do you consider work? So like, obviously the 2 hours before lock, I think I'm kind of similar to you. That's when I'm starting and doing a lot of the work. And then I think you have to count anytime you are like final lock of the night, which is usually at like 9:30 Central Time, 9 o'clock, whenever that is. That I think you need to count, like, because you need to be, at least for NBA, you need to be tied to your computer, or at least available to make changes to lineups. So you got to count that time. And then I don't know, post lock, like, do you count watching the games or like paying attention to the games?
No.
Maybe there's some edge there, but yeah, I don't think you count that either. But
I don't count that.
For guys, if you then add into those hours, which is, I don't know, what is that, 5 hours something total, from like 2 hours before lock to when the final lock is. I guess we're looking at about 5.5 hours some nights.
If you clock out at work and have drinks with your buddies, like at a real job, that's not extra hours you're getting paid for.
All right.
And speaking of which, this is not a real job. I mean, I know some of these younglings have never had a real job probably, and real jobs suck and bosses suck, and that's the whole like main reason I've got into gambling at a young age. Is like, what? Fuck this. So this is not a real job.
I feel the same way. It's pretty great.
It's
so awesome. So tying in these last two questions then. So the potentially diminishing edge of DFS, if it becomes necessary at some point for you to work 80 hours per week to stay on top of the DFS world, are you willing to put in 80 hours per week?
Probably not.
That's when you move on?
Yeah, at this point. 2014 I would have. Who knows what I was doing back then? I was putting in a lot more hours then, because I was building everything out and coming up with ideas. I was hungrier. I don't know, like if I'm gonna put 80 hours a week into, like, I would probably start a business.
Yeah. And
then just play DFS for fun. Or just not play it at all. I don't know. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
If like poker came back, I'm not even sure I would play it. And I imagine since it would be Illinois only, like I could crush with probably little effort for like 6 months or so, maybe even longer. But it's like, but you guys sit in front of the computer. Well, first I'd have to get my game back up to snuff, and that could take a while. But then you guys sit in front of the computer for hours. You know, I'm not sure I would do that. Like I imagine I can make a pretty penny, but it's like, I'm not sure I want to do that. So like I'm thinking like with DFS, if I have to sit at my computer for 80 hours a week, I don't know. I want to say no, most likely, but who knows? You never know, I guess.
All right, that's I think that is a fair answer. And yeah, there's obviously plenty of opportunities. You mentioned on a show recently, there's plenty of opportunities to make money out there. So if you get to the point where it's just not worth it for DFS, then yeah, there are other opportunities out there. And you know, you've probably built up a big enough nest egg at this point that you're not in any rush. Like when you stop playing DFS, you don't need to get back to. You've said that you wouldn't go back to the grind, so you'd be able to find
Plus,
something else.
Just being an entrepreneur is a lot more appealing to me right now than when I was younger. I think that the whole, because it's a different game nowadays with the internet and social media and stuff like that. It's kind of interesting. When you look at YouTube, at the analytics and the ads they pay, people trying to advertise on your shows, and like all these little pieces that you learn over the years is it's like, oh, maybe taking a crack at building up a business would be fun. It wouldn't be it'd be a grind, but in this scenario I have to put 80 hours in anyways. The X value of return might be better, and it might be a new adventure that's more intriguing to me. I say that, and then I start a business, and then like 6 months later, I'm like, business is over. This is too hard. Everyone's fired.
You've clearly got some entrepreneurial spirit to you. We'll talk a little bit later about some of your side ventures outside of DFS. You're already, I mean, you say you don't put in 8 hours of work of DFS, but I would guess that you have to be putting in many hours of work overall because you're working on these side projects as well. But we'll save that for the end. Talk just a little bit more DFS before we get into those side projects a little bit. So I'm just curious. So you and I have some mutual friends in the DFS world. Alex, Steve Buzzard, RBX88. I'm curious what your DFS social life looks like in general. Do you keep in touch with a lot of people in the DFS world, and do you think that you've benefited from those relationships in terms of your DFS EV?
DFS EV only with Steve.
Okay.
Buzzard. Although I think Pete and I have had a mutual beneficial relationship actually with I've given him some tips on like game theory ideas for best ball and stuff like that, and he succeeded there. Like I've had pieces of people and stuff that I've gotten some money out of.
Yep.
Me and RBX swap pieces occasionally.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever asked anyone a strategy question.
Okay.
Except me and Steve have talked.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like nothing like helping like me and Alex, we've just talked like normal people, and we went to the bar once and stuff, and like we're not talking strategy really.
You're both in Chicago, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yeah, him Martin, who's Papa Gates,
Yep.
Sean Zahn, who now works at Awesemo too. Who else was there? Evan Silva, who's now at ETR. He wasn't then. Tom, co-owner of Awesemo.
I believe Rinpack used to live in Chicago.
That was Rinpack's first show that day that I met him. He came out to the bar that same day. Wow. And he banked Showdown for his first win.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So do you keep in touch with many other? I mean, I guess that's kind of a lot of pros that you're keeping in touch with.
That was just one night. I don't keep in touch with a lot of those guys, but yeah, right. I mean, occasionally, yeah. I guess Davis Manic, Pete, RBX.
don't want to put you on the spot. You're going to
Yeah,
forget some
no, I'm
people and you're going to feel bad about it later.
Yeah. But this isn't. It's not real life though. It's not like I'm
Yeah.
hanging out with anyone. in
Right.
real
It's
life.
all
Yeah.
online. Yeah. I mean, it's the same thing for me. I've never met
Yeah.
Alex in person. I've never met Steve in person. I met RBX like at a live final briefly, but it's mostly I talk to people online a little bit. And I was gonna. So, would you recommend that to newer DFS players, forming friendships, group chats as a way of kind of
Definitely.
helping each other improve? Yep.
Yeah. I'm just bad. I'm bad at that. I mean, that was the reason I started going public, if that's the right word, and making videos, is to like get in the community more. It's just like forcing myself to talk to more people. And I still haven't really done it with strategy a ton, which was kind of my goal. Yeah, I know a group of guys who like have their own little clique that they talk strategy and make simulations and stuff like that. And it's definitely the way to go. If you can, especially if you're like up and coming, I highly recommend it.
All right, cool. Let's shoot. So we're running up to a time constraint here. We've got about 5 minutes left. So let's just shoot through some listener questions. A lot of these seem to be jokes anyways, but I think listeners like to have their questions answered. So I'll just shoot through them. Jason Roslin asks, why don't you like Showdown PGA? Is that do you dislike Showdown? Do you not play Showdown PGA? Do you dislike it? What's
No, he I think that was a Twitter thread where I said I wasn't playing the show. Maybe he's joking. The Showdown last week, the players, because the weather was crazy. They had these crazy Showdown going. But it's purely because my Showdown simulation is not built. Is the main reason. And my sims are not built. It's only built out for a full 4 rounds with a cut.
Okay. All right. Good. I'm happy with that answer. Felix Castro, who won $1 million on DraftKings Best Ball, I believe, asked what your hand size is. I'm not sure if this is an NFL draft joke or a fish gloves joke.
I don't get it.
Okay. All right. That's how big your gloves are. All right. That's his hand size right there. There you go, Felix. So you're gonna have to watch the video and not listen to the podcast. All right. So there's a question. John Kelly asked, he'd like for you to speak about your rise to becoming the #1 MMA tout. I know you did a stream with John recently about MMA. Right. Do you enjoy talking about MMA?
I do. Yeah. Cause like ever since COVID, when that was like the only sport, we were doing shows on it and stuff. Yeah. I liked it in high school. Okay. I liked MMA in high school, and then I just stopped. And boxing too was there was some good boxing back then, and then kind of like got lame. I don't know, like they changed the rules, and I just kind of stopped watching it. Anyways, with COVID coming back, I got back into it, and now it's just like those guys are so tough, and like it's amazing athletes, and the DFS product is great. So I just got back into it, yeah, and I joke. Because we do MMA live streams, and John comes on as like our MMA expert guy. Just me and Pete, we don't know. That's the bit. Is I'm the #1 MMA guy, and John's #2. He knows what he's doing a little bit.
All right, I like that. Yeah, that's good. I was gonna ask you if you claim the crown. It sounds like you do. You claim the crown.
I claim the crown.
That's where it's coming from. He's conceded that you are the #1 MMA tout.
And my Twitter bet recommendations, I'm also like 8-1 or something too.
Wow.
So,
yeah. That's impressive.
Pure luck.
I got a guy who goes by the handle OG Mansfan 69 asks what your latest feelings are on Ben the Better. So I think he's referencing you did kind of an expose on Ben the Better on the Lolz podcast where you outed him as being maybe not a fish, like maybe he's a guy who's pretending to be a fish. What is your current stance on Ben the Better? Are you standing by the expose at this point?
I haven't really thought about it much afterwards. We just don't talk about him, and I don't message him or think,
Okay. I know he came back and denied it, but I have not been following that saga since the expose either.
He's welcome to his little show, whatever he wants to do.
All right. Fair enough. James Morrison, I don't know if this is a guy that maybe this is an inside kind of ask what is the most epic Bink celebration you've ever had?
Oh yeah, you got the wrong guy, man. I'm not a part like a lot of my friends and like family moved out of the city and stuff too, so it's not like, hey, let's go out, it's gonna happen. So I don't think I've really had any celebration that was really worth writing home about.
Yeah, me neither. I'm the same way, so yeah. I get it. Okay.
Sometimes I'm in bed sleeping.
Yeah. Oh, that never happens to me. I'm always up until the end of the slate, but
Mm.
all right, so we're really running out of time now, but I really
Yeah.
just want to touch on your other projects briefly because I reference Lolz all the time. I'm a huge fan of Lolz. I kind of think that there's sort of like a little cult following for Lolz. Like there are people who check in every week, and it's generally like some of the top DFS players in the world. Like it's a really fascinating podcast that you do with Pete Overzet, and I think at a glance, you guys kind of seem like an odd pairing a little bit, just because like Peter, I think he's a former improv guy or maybe a former stand-up comic guy. I don't know, but then like you're a former poker guy, so I didn't quite get what it was going to be, what the show was going to be. I still don't know exactly what the show is, but you have great chemistry, and I think that Pete is also, on top of being a funny guy, he's also very sharp, and I think the same of you. You're obviously very sharp, but then you're also an entertaining guy. So I think a lot of us really enjoy the Lolz podcast. But I'm curious how it came about. How did you meet Pete, and did you immediately decide to do a podcast together?
We met on Grindr. No, I messaged him. I was a fan of like his Roto Grinders content and stuff, and like I could tell like by like some of his contents, like he knows a bit about poker. Like he knew some like GTO terms and stuff like that, and he knew and he knows enough about DFS too. Like, and I also knew like I could help him probably too. Like I'm like I could give him some tips, and maybe that'll be good content where I give him tips or something like that. And so I approached him, and also when you do your first videos, I know we're running up on time here, but like when I did my first video, like I messaged Josh Engelman, and I was like, my God, I sound like I have something wrong with me. Like I cannot do these videos. I don't know how you guys do this, but then you get better and better at it.
Yeah.
But I wanted someone else with me to help, and he clearly can hold his own show, much less host a show. So he had all the skills I was looking for, and I thought it might be fun. And I messaged him, and he said no. And then he had some trip he canceled or got canceled on him or something. And then he messaged me back, and he goes, you know what? Actually, let's just try it for a while. I have a trip canceled. Let's do it. And I'm like, all right, let's do it. And here we are.
And I was right. He must have had the same thing that I had, because I had a trip that I had planned. We were going to go to the Philippines, and then due to COVID, we had to cancel at the last minute. I wonder, because you guys started like the first episode was on the day that Rudy Gobert canceled the World, right? So that was literally the same night that I canceled my trip. So maybe it was
it was probably COVID related, yeah. But like, yeah, we don't know why. Then what the COVID? Then Rudy Gobert wouldn't line up though, right? Because wouldn't it have been after that? But no, maybe they were just being like, maybe they were just being cautious, canceling before it goes.
Yeah, could be. We canceled probably later than we should have, so that would make sense. And how would you describe Lolz to a potential listener who hasn't checked it out yet?
It's just a gambling podcast.
Fair.
I mean, yeah, I would say. I mean, we do talk about politics, but it's mainly gambling politics.
True.
We talk about gossip, but it's mainly DFS gambling, sports betting, gambling, gossip, and we talk strategy occasionally, and it's a variety show too, I guess. So like we did March Madness, and we also I would say gambling and crypto, because we love crypto, NFTs.
Got into Top Shot briefly. Yep.
Yeah. But like I mean, that's the fun thing about a podcast is we could do whatever we want. We don't have a boss. We don't have a company we work for, so we could swear and say whatever we want or something offensive, and who cares? Like, we're not going to get in trouble. So some episodes are just off the rails, and but if you're looking for like live before the lock structure, you're not going to get that. You're not going to get a graphic of our topics on the left side, because we just make it up as we go.
Yep. And it's a very entertaining show. I would definitely recommend it to anybody who hasn't checked it out yet. It's LOLZ. Somebody messaged me on Twitter and said, you mentioned this Lolz show all the time, LOWELLS. And I was like, no, it's Lolz, LOLZ. So you can find it on Brian's YouTube, Brian Hooper. So let's close it. I just want to give you real quick, 30 seconds. Can you tell me the general idea of your new sports betting project that you've put out there? Is it available now?
Yeah, it is. Bric75.com is my website. That's also where I have like the free props and ownership percentages and stuff. It is a overlay for sports books where you could take like Awesemo's data and just upload it, and it'll display right on top of the sports book. So like if you think like he has Karl Anthony Towns for 22 points. You just upload it, and then when you're in the sports book, it'll highlight in green or red if it's over or under that specific number. And I'm adding to it the next few days will be an update for Underdog. So you could upload like Awesemo's best ball rankings right next to the player's name. So there'll be like the Underdog average draft position and Awesemo's, and there'll be 2 columns. So you could put like, if you have like a little more game theory in you could put like what's your exposures you have so far on the player, and you can, adjust and diversify some of your field, or maybe you could put a different company's best ball numbers and Awesemo's if you want. You could have all of them up there displayed. Yeah. It's based off of the old poker HUDs. It's a straight ripoff. Is the idea. I used to love those poker HUDs back in the day, where it would have information on your opponents based on your hand histories that you download for free from the site. It was all legal. It's just a straight ripoff of that, because I hated going from like Awesemo's page to the sportsbook, Awesemo's page to the sportsbook. Right. Well, and I mainly hated it with my stuff, because I would write all my stuff in Excel, and then I'd be like, okay, click, who's the highest? Okay, now I have to go, what team is he on again? And then go click. So it just speeds up the whole process. It's a 2-day free trial if you want to use it. And if you don't like it, you could just cancel it. It's Sportsbook HUD on bric75.com.
Bric75.com. So I can't sports bet here in Minnesota, so I didn't think that I would have any use for it, but I will definitely use that for Underdog. That sounds really awesome. So
cool.
Very cool. So where can people find you, Brian?
Brian Hooper _ is my Twitter handle. That's probably the best way. YouTube channel's Brian Hooper. I think it's Brian Hooper 75 actually. But if you Google Brian Hooper or Bric75, you're gonna find me. I'm on Twitch too. It's also Brian Hooper. I just started that, so I don't have any followers. So if you guys follow me on Twitch, I appreciate it. It's kind of an embarrassingly low number there.
I don't have a Twitch, otherwise I would. Maybe I'll go find it.
Brian, and bric75.com is my website, and I think that's everywhere. We have a Discord. We have the Deposit Kingdom Discord, and there's a Lolz forum in there if you guys want to talk to me and Pete. And I also have my own Discord, which is not as active as Pete, but it's easy to get a hold of me, which is also Bric75. So you'll be able to find all those. Yeah.
Perfect. All right. Well, ran out of time here. Thanks again to Brian Hooper for joining me on episode 5 of High Stakes. You can find episode 6 of High Stakes next Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, on the Awesemo YouTube channel, or anywhere that podcasts live. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.